Chapter 12 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. First Lensman, Chapter 12. Approaching Covenda in his dead-black, converted scout ship, Virgil Samms cut his drive, killed his atomics, and turned on his super-powered detectors. For 5 full detets in every direction, throughout a spherical volume of over 10 detets in diameter, space was void of ships. Some activity was apparent upon the planet dead ahead, but the First Lensman did not worry about that. The drug runners would, of course, have atomics in their plants, even if there were no spaceships actually on the planet, which there probably were. What he did worry about was detection. There would be plenty of detectors, probably automatic. Not only ordinary sub-ethereals, but electros and radars as well. He flashed up to within 1 1/4 detets, stopped, and checked again. Space was still empty. Then, after making a series of observations, he went inert and established an intrinsic velocity which he hoped would be close enough. He again shut off his atomics and started the 16-cylinder diesel engine, which would do its best to replace them. That best was none too good, but it would do. Besides driving the Bergenholm, it could furnish enough kilodynes of thrust to produce a velocity many times greater than any attainable by inert matter. It used a lot of oxygen per minute, but it would not run for very many minutes. With her atomics out of action, his ship would not register upon the plates of the long-range detectors universally used. Since she was nevertheless traveling faster than light, neither electromagnetic detector webs nor radar could see her. Good enough. Samms was not the system's best computer, nor did he have the system's finest instruments. His positional error could be corrected easily enough, but as he drove nearer and nearer to Covenda, keeping toward the last in line with its one small moon, he wondered more and more as to how much of an allowance he should make for error in his intrinsic, which he had set up practically by guess. And there was another variable, the cutoff. He slowed down to just over 1 light. But even at that comparatively slow speed, an error of 1 millisecond at cutoff meant a displacement of 200 miles. He switched the spotter into the Berg's cutoff circuit, set it for 300 miles, and waited tensely at his controls. The relays clicked, the driving force expired, the vessel went inert. Sam's eyes, flashing from instrument to instrument, told him that matters could have been worse. His intrinsic was neither straight up, as he had hoped, nor straight down, as he had feared, but almost exactly halfway between the two, straight out. He discovered that fact just in time. In another second or two, he would have been out beyond the moon's protecting bulk and thus detectable from Covenda. He went free, flashed back to the opposite boundary of his area of safety, went inert, and put the full power of the bellowing diesel to the task of bucking down his erroneous intrinsic, losing altitude continuously. Again and again he repeated the maneuver, and thus, grimly and stubbornly, he fought his ship to ground. He was very glad to see that the surface of the satellite was rougher, rockier, ruggeder, and more cratered even than that of Earth's Luna. Upon such a terrain as this, it would be next to impossible to spot even a moving vessel, if it moved carefully. By a series of short and careful inertialess hops, correcting his intrinsic velocity after each one by an inert collision with the ground, he maneuvered his vessel into such a position that Covenda's enormous globe hung directly overhead. Breathing a profoundly deep breath of relief, he killed the big engine, cut in his fully charged accumulators, and turned on detector and spy ray. He would see what he could see. His detector showed that there was only 1 point of activity on the whole planet. He located it precisely. Then, after cutting his spy ray to minimum power, he approached it gingerly, yard by yard. Stopped. As he had more than half expected, there was a spy ray block. A big one, almost 2 miles in diameter. It would be almost directly beneath him, or rather, almost straight overhead, in about 3 hours. Samms had brought along a telescope, considerably more powerful than the telescopic visiplate of his scout. Since the surface gravity of this moon was low, scarcely one-fifth that of Earth, he had no difficulty in lugging the parts out of the ship or in setting the thing up. But even the telescope did not do much good. The moon was close to Govenda, as astronomical distances go, but really worthwhile astronomical optical instruments simply are not portable. Thus the lensman saw something that, by sufficient stretch of the imagination, could have been a factory, and his eyes straining at the tantalizing limit of visibility, he even made himself believe that he saw a toothpick-shaped object and a darkly circular blob, either of which could have been the spaceship of the outlaws. He was sure, however, of two facts. There were no real cities upon Govenda. There were no modern spaceports or even airfields. He dismounted the scope, stored it, set his detectors, and waited. He had to sleep at times, of course, but any ordinary detector rig can be set to sound off at any change in its status, and Sam's was no ordinary rig. Wherefore, when the drug-monger's vessel took off, Sam's left Govenda as unobtrusively as he had approached it and swung into that vessel's line. Sam's strategy had been worked out long since. On his diesel, at a distance of just over 1 detet, he would follow the outlaw as fast as he could, long enough to establish his line. He would then switch to atomic drive and close up to between 1 and 2 detets. Then again go on to diesel for a check. He would keep this up for as long as might prove necessary. As far as any of the lensmen knew, spaceways always used regular liners or freighters in this business, and this scout was much faster than any such vessel. And even if, highly improbable thought, the enemy ship was faster than his own, it would still be within range of those detectors when it got to wherever it was that it was going. But how wrong Sam's was. At his first check, instead of being not over 2 detets away, the quarry was 3.5. At the second, the distance was 4.25. At the third, almost exactly 5. Scowling, Sam's watched the erstwhile brilliant point of light fade into darkness. That circular blob that he had almost seen then had been the spaceship, but it had not been a sphere, as he had supposed. Instead, it had been a teardrop, sticking, sharp tail down, in the ground. Ultra-fast. This was the result. But ideas had blown up under him before. They probably would again. He resumed atomic drive and made arrangements with the port admiral to rendezvous with him and the Chicago at the earliest possible time. "What is there along that line?" he demanded of the Super Dreadnought's chief pilot, even before junction had been made. "Nothing, sir, that we know of," that worthy reported, after studying his charts. He boarded the gigantic ship of war, and with Kinnison pored over those same charts. "Your best bet is Arisia, I think," Kinnison concluded finally. "Not too near your line, but they could very easily figure that a one-day dogleg would be a good investment. And Spaceways owns it, you know, from core to planetary limits, the richest uranium mines in existence. Made to order. Nobody would suspect a uranium ship. How about throwing a globe around Arisia?" Sam's thought for minutes. "No. Not yet, at least. We don't know enough yet." "I know it. That's why it looks to me like a good time and place to learn something," Kinnison argued. "We know, almost know at least, that a super-fast ship carrying thionite has just landed there. This is the hottest lead we've had. I say englobe the planet, declare martial law, and not let anything in or out until we find it. Somebody there must know something, a lot more than we do. I say hunt him out and make him talk." "You're just popping off, Rod. You know as well as I do that nabbing a few of the small fry isn't enough. We can't move openly until we can strike high." "I suppose not," Kinnison grumbled. "But we know so damned little, Virg." "Little enough," Samms agreed. "Of the 3 main divisions, only the political aspect is at all clear. In the drug division, we know where thionite comes from and where it is processed, and Arisia may be, probably is, another link. On the other end, we know a lot of peddlers and a few middlemen, nobody higher. We have no actual knowledge whatever as to who the higher-ups are or how they work, and it's the bosses we want. Concerning the pirates, we know even less. Murgatroyd may be no more a man's name than Zwilnik is. Before you get too far away from the subject, what are you going to do about Eridan? Nothing for the moment would be best, I believe. However, Konobos and Alnalton should switch their attention from Spaceways passenger liners to the uranium ships from Eridan to all three of the inner planets. Check? Check. Particularly since it explains so beautifully the merry-go-round they have been on so long, chasing the same packages of dope backwards and forwards so many times that the corners of the boxes got worn round. We've got to get the top men, and they're smart. Which reminds me, Morgan as big boss does not square up with the Morgan that you and Fairchild smacked down so easily when he tried to investigate the Hill. A loud-mouthed, chiseling politician might have a lockbox full of documentary evidence about party bosses and power deals and chorus girls and Martian technocodes, but the man we're after very definitely would not. You're telling me? This point was such a sore one that Samms relapsed into idiom. The boys should have cracked that box a week ago, but they struck a knot. I'll see if they know anything yet. Tune in, Rod. Ray. He lensed a thought at his cousin. Yes, Virg? Have you got a spy ray into that lockbox yet? Glad you called. Yes, last night. Empty. Empty as a sub-deb skull. Except for an atomic-powered gimmick that it took Bergenholm's whole laboratory almost a week to neutralize. I see. Thanks. Off. Samms turned to Kinnison. Well? Nice. A mighty smart operator. Kinnison gave credit ungrudgingly. Now I'll buy your picture. What a man. But now, and I've got my ears pinned back, what was it you started to say about pirates? Just that we have very little to go on, except for the kind of stuff they seem to like best, and the fact that even armed escorts have not been able to protect certain types of shipments of late. The escorts, too, have disappeared. But with these facts as bases, it seems to me that we could arrange something, perhaps like this. A fast, sleek freighter and a heavy battlecruiser bored steadily through the interstellar void. The merchantman carried a fabulously valuable cargo, not bullion or jewels or plate of price, but things literally above price, machine tools of highest precision, delicate optical and electrical instruments, fine watches and chronometers. She also carried First Lensman Virgil Samms. And aboard the warship there was Roderick Kinnison. For the first time in history, a mere battlecruiser bore a port admiral's flag. As far as the detectors of those two ships could reach, space was empty of man-made craft. But the two lensmen knew that they were not alone. 1.5 detets away, loafing along at the freighter's speed and paralleling her course, in a hemispherical formation open to the front, there flew 6 tremendous teardrops. Super dreadnoughts of whose existence no Tellurian or colonial government had even an inkling. They were the fastest and deadliest craft yet built by man, the first fruits of Operation Bennett. And they, too, carried lensmen, Costigan, Jack Kinnison, Northrop, Dronvire of Rigel 4, Rodebush, and Cleveland. Nor was there need of detectors. The 8 lensmen were in as close communication as though they had been standing in the same room. "On your toes, men," came Sam's quiet thought. "We are about to pass within a few light minutes of an uninhabited solar system. No Tellurian-type planets at all. This may be it. Tune to Kinnison on one side and to your captains on the other. Take over, Rod." At one instant, the ether, for one full detet in every direction, was empty. In the next, 3 intensely brilliant spots of detection flashed into being, in line with the dead planet so invitingly close at hand. This development came as a surprise, since only 2 raiders had been expected, a battleship to take care of the escort, a cruiser to take the merchantman. The fact that the pirates had become cautious or suspicious and had sent 3 super dreadnoughts on the mission, however, did not operate to change the patrol's strategy. For Samms had concluded, and Dronvire and Bergenholm and Rularion of Jupiter had agreed, that the real commander of the expedition would be aboard the vessel that attacked the freighter. In the next instant, then, each lensman saw what Roderick Kinnison saw in the very instant of his seeing it. 6 more points of hard white light sprang into being upon the plates of the guileful freighter and the decoying cruiser. "Jack and Mace, take the leader," Kinnison snapped out the thought. "Dronvire and Costigan, right wing. He's the one that's going after the freighter. Fred and Lyman, left wing. Hype!" The pirate ships flashed up, filling ether and sub-ether alike with a solid mush of interference through which no call for help could be driven. 2 super dreadnoughts against the cruiser, 1 against the freighter. The former, of course, had been expected to offer more than a token resistance. Battle cruisers of the patrol were powerful vessels, both on offense and defense, and it was a known and recognized fact that the men of the patrol were men. The pirate commander who attacked the freighter, however, was a surprised pirate indeed. His first beam, directed well forward, well ahead of the precious cargo, should have wrought the same havoc against the screens and wall shields and structure as a white-hot poker would against a pat of lukewarm butter. Practically the whole nose section, including the control room, should have whiffed outward into space in gobbets and streamers of molten and gaseous metal. But nothing of the sort happened. This merchantman was no pushover. No ordinary screens protected that particular freighter and the person of First Lensman Samms. Roderick Kinnison had very thoroughly seen to that. In sheer mass, her screen generators outweighed her entire cargo, heavy as that cargo was by more than 2 to 1. Thus the pirates' beams stormed and struck and clawed and clung uselessly. They did not penetrate. And as the surprised attacker shoved his power up and up to his absolute ceiling of effort, the only result was to increase the already tremendous pyrotechnic display of energies cascading in all directions from the fiercely radiant defenses of the Tellurian freighter. And in a few seconds the commanding officers of the other 2 attacking battleships were also surprised. The battlecruiser screens did not go down, even under the combined top effort of 2 super dreadnoughts. And she did not have a beam hot enough to light a match. She must be all screen. But before the startled outlaws could do anything about the realization that they, instead of being the trappers, were in cold fact the trapped, all 3 of them were surprised again, the last surprise that any of them was ever to receive. 6 mighty teardrops, vastly bigger, faster, more powerful than their own, were rushing upon them, blanketing all channels of communication as efficiently and as enthusiastically as they themselves had been doing an instant before. Being out simply and ruthlessly to kill and not to capture, 4 of the newcomers from Bennett polished off the cruiser's 2 attackers in very short order. They simply flashed in, went inert at the 4 corners of an imaginary tetrahedron, and threw everything they had, and they had plenty. Possibly, just barely possibly, there may have been somewhere a space battle shorter than that one, but there certainly was never one more violent. Then the 4 set out after their 2 sister ships and the remaining pirate, who was frantically devoting his every effort to the avoidance of engagement. But with 6 ships, each one of which was of vastly greater individual power than his own, at the 6 corners of an octahedron of which he was the geometrical center, his ability to cut tractor beams and to squirt out from between 2 opposed pressors did him no good whatever. He was englobed, or rather, to apply the correct terminology to an operation involving so few units, he was boxed. To blow the one remaining raider out of the ether would have been easy enough, but that was exactly what the patrolmen did not want to do. They wanted information. Wherefore each of the patrol ships directed a dozen or so beams upon the scintillating protective screens of the enemy. Enough so that every square yard of defensive web was under direct attack. As rapidly as it could be done without losing equilibrium or synchronization, the power of each beam was stepped up until the wildly violet incandescence of the pirate screen showed that it was hovering on the very edge of failure. Then, in the instant, needle beamers went furiously to work. The screen was already loaded to its limit. No transfer of defensive energy was possible. Thus tremendously overloaded locally, it flared through the ultraviolet into the black and went down, and the fiercely penetrant daggers of pure force stabbed and stabbed and stabbed. The engine room went first, even though the needlers had to gnaw 100-foot hole straight through the pirate craft in order to find the vital installations. Then, enough damage done so that spy rays could get in, the rest of the work was done with precision and dispatch. In a matter of seconds, the pirate hulk lay helpless, and the patrolman peeled her like an orange, or rather, more like an amateur cook very wastefully peeling a potato. Resistless knives of energy sheared off tail section and nose section, top and bottom, port and starboard sides, then slabbed off the corners of what was left until the control room was almost bared to space. Then, as soon as the intrinsic velocities could possibly be matched, board and storm, with Dronvire of Rigel 4 in the lead, closely followed by Costigan, Northrop, Kinnison the Younger, and a platoon of armed and armored space marines. Samms and the two scientists did not belong in such a melee as that which was to come, and knew it. Kinnison the Elder did not belong either, but did not know it. In fact, he cursed fluently and bitterly at having to stay out. Nevertheless, out he stayed. Dronvire, on the other hand, did not like to fight. The very thought of actual, bodily, hand-to-hand combat revolted every fiber of his being. In view of what the spy ray men were reporting, however, and of what all the Lensman knew of pirate psychology, Dronvire had to get into that control room first, and he had to get there fast. And if he had to fight, he could, and physically he was wonderfully well equipped for just such activity. To his immense physical strength, the natural concomitant of a force of gravity more than twice Earth's, the armor which so encumbered the Tellurian battlers was a scarcely noticeable impediment. His sense of perception, which could not be barred by any material substance, kept him fully informed of every development in his neighborhood. His literally incredible speed enabled him not merely to parry a blow aimed at him, but to bash out the brains of the would-be attacker before that blow could be more than started. And whereas a human being can swing only one space axe or fire only 2 ray guns at a time, the Rigelian plunged through space toward what was left of the pirate vessel, swinging not 1 or 2 space axes, but 4, each held in a lithe and supple, but immensely strong, tentacular hand. Why axes? Why not Lewistons or rifles or pistols? Because the space armor of that day could withstand almost indefinitely the output of 2 or 3 handheld projectors, because the resistance of its defensive fields varied directly as the cube of the velocity of any material projectile encountering them. Thus, and strangely enough, the advance of science had forced the readoption of that long-extinct weapon. Most of the pirates had died, of course, during the dismemberment of their ship. Many more had been picked off by the needle-beam gunners. In the control room, however, there was a platoon of elite guards, clustered so closely about the commander and his officers that needles could not be used, a group that would have to be wiped out by hand. If the attack had come by way of the only doorway, so that the pirates could have concentrated their weapons upon 1 or 2 patrolmen, the commander might have had time enough to do what he was under compulsion to do. But while the patrolmen were still in space, a plane of force sheared off the entire side of the room. A tractor beam jerked the detached wall away, and the attackers floated in en masse. Weightless combat is not at all like any form of gymnastics known to us ground grippers. It is much more difficult to master, and in times of stress the muscles revert involuntarily and embarrassingly to their wonted gravity field techniques. Thus the endeavors of most of the battlers upon both sides, while earnest enough and deadly enough of intent, were almost comically unproductive of result. In a matter of seconds, frantically struggling figures were floating from wall to ceiling to wall to floor, striking wildly, darting backward from the violence of their own fierce swings. The Tellurian Lensmen, however, had had more practice and remembered their lessons better. Jack Kinnison, soaring into the room, grabbed the first solid thing he could reach, a post. Pulling himself down to the floor, he braced both feet, sighted past the nearest foeman, swung his axe, and gave a tremendous shove. Such was his timing that in the instant of maximum effort the beak of his atrociously effective weapon encountered the pirate's helmet, and that was that. He wrenched his axe free and shoved the corpse away in such a direction that the reaction would send him against a wall at the floor line, in position to repeat the maneuver. Since Mason Northrop was heavier and stronger than his friend, his technique was markedly different. He dove for the chart table, which, of course, was welded to the floor. He hooked one steel-shod foot around one of the table's legs and braced the other against its top. Weightless but inert, it made no difference whether his position was vertical or horizontal or anywhere between. From this point of vantage, with his length of body and arm and axe, he could cover a lot of room. He reached out, hooked bill of axe into belt or line snap or angle of armor, and pulled. And as the helplessly raging pirate floated past him, he swung and struck. And that, too, was that. Dronvire of Rigel 4 did not rush to the attack. He had never been and was not now either excited or angry. Indeed, it was only empirically that he knew what anger and excitement were. He had never been in any kind of a fight. Therefore, he paused for a couple of seconds to analyze the situation and to determine his own most efficient method of operation. He would not have to be in physical contact with the pirate captain to go to work on his mind, but he would have to be closer than this, and he would have to be free from physical attack while he concentrated. He perceived what Kinnison and Costigan and Northrop were doing, and knew why each was working in a different fashion. He applied that knowledge to his own mass, to his own musculature, to the length and strength of his arms, each one of which was twice as long and 10 times as strong as the trunk of an elephant. He computed forces and leverages, actions and reactions, points of application, stresses and strains. He threw away 2 of his axes. The 2 empty arms reached out, each curling around the neck of a pirate. 2 axes flashed, grazing each pinioning arm so nearly that it seemed incredible that the sharp edges did not shear away the Rigelian's own armor. 2 heads floated away from 2 bodies, and Dronvire reached for 2 more. And 2, and 2, and 2. Calm and dispassionate, but not wasting a motion or a millisecond, Dronvire accomplished more in less time than all the Tellurians in the room. "Costigan, Northrop, Kinnison, attend!" He launched a thought. "I have no time to kill more of them. The commander is dying of a self-inflicted wound, and I have important work to do. See to it, please, that these remaining creatures do not attack me while I am doing it." Dronvire tuned his mind to that of the pirate and probed. Although dying, the pirate captain offered fierce resistance, but the Rigelian was not alone. Attuned to his mind, working smoothly with it, giving it strengths and qualities which no Rigelian ever had had or ever would have, were the 2 strongest minds of Earth, that of Rod the Rock Kinnison, with the driving force, the indomitable will, the transcendent urge of all human heredity, and that of Virgil Samms, with all that had made him First Lensman. "Tell!" that terrific triple mind demanded, with a force which simply could not be denied. "Where are you from? Resistance is useless. Yours or that of those whom you serve. Your bases and powers are smaller and weaker than ours, since Spaceways is only a corporation and we are the Galactic Patrol. Tell! Who are your bosses? Tell! Tell!" Under that irresistible urge there appeared, foggily and without any hint of knowledge of name or of spatial coordinates, an embattled planet, very similar in a smaller way to the Patrol's own Bennett, and, even more foggily, but still not so blurred but that their features were unmistakably recognizable, the images of 2 men. That of Murgatroyd, the pirate chief, completely strange to both Kinnison and Samms, and, back of Murgatroyd and above him, that of Big Jim Town. End of Chapter 12.